I think there's maybe two reasons why you get into Bitcoin, because you have to, or because you're greedy. Really, the question that people should be coming to and asking you is, how do I stop from losing my money? It's not about whether it's a good time to buy Bitcoin. You know, there's always a good time to be free. Now, when is a good time to be free? Today's a good time to be free. Ripple is notorious, right? They're notorious for having no ethics in the way they behave and being solely self-interested. And one of the ways in which they're self-interested is that they...
Rob, good morning. How are you doing today?
Wonderful, wonderful. Great to connect.
You as well, man. I saw you on Twitter. I was mindlessly scrolling and I saw Bikes and Bitcoin's like the coolest Twitter name I've ever seen. And I figured I would reach out, man. So thanks for taking a random DM from a pleb like myself. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. You are a wealth of knowledge on Bitcoin and mining. Why don't you just start by giving us a little bit about your background and why you are in the mining space specifically?
Sure, be happy to. So I got started in Bitcoin kind of by and large in 2017. I was living in the South and running a startup at the time and discovered this Bitcoin thing that seemed interesting from an asset perspective. And as I have kind of decided, I think there's maybe two reasons why you get into Bitcoin, because you have to, or because you're greedy. And I was definitely in the latter. I was like, cool. This seems like a thing that could make lots of money. Why don't I put some money into it and see what happens? So did that and kept learning about it. And as way leads on to way, got very busy with the startup thing and wasn't able to kind of dive down and sort of fully orange pill until a year or two later when I came back to Bitcoin. But at that point, I wasn't so much fascinated by Bitcoin as a network. The network aspect is amazing. And once you kind of get it, it becomes really evident that, oh, this is a really cool hard money alternative to what we have now. But it was actually the network aspect of Bitcoin that kind of really brought it to life for me. So when I started digging into how it functioned, particularly through the mining side of things, that's when I really started to get involved and decided that I wanted to work full-time in Bitcoin. And so have worked full-time in the space, started doing kind of educational write-ups in the mining space, did one of the, if not the earliest deployment of what was called Steve Barber's brown box, which then became his black box, his kind of home mining deployment. You could build it. He had a prototype version that you could build out of a 4x8 piece of plywood that I built in an apartment, in a 5th-story apartment in Denver, and had a couple of S9s running on my patio and did a little write-up on it, started publishing through Bitcoin Magazine, and have since worked with a couple of operators in the space. I've worked with Upstream Data, started a privacy-oriented hosting and self-mining company up in Wyoming, worked with the mega miner Riot, and I'm currently running research and education with Bitcoin Park.
Epic. You early on, you mentioned how the network is such a beautiful part of Bitcoin. And I saw this tweet last night. Let me share my screen really quick. And I'd be curious to hear what your take is on this. So Patrick Bet-David, big podcaster,
oh my goodness. Yeah.
The PBD show. And he asked the question, which crypto has the best long-term technology? As you can see, 43% outpacing Bitcoin is Ripple XRP. How would you respond when you see something like this to somebody who may not understand what he's really asking when he says the best long-term technology?
Oh my goodness. What a loaded question, Kyle. Well, Ripple is notorious, right? They're notorious for having no ethics in the way they behave and being solely self-interested. And one of the ways in which they're self-interested is that they deploy a large number of bots on the Bird app on Twitter or X. So any question or any survey that even has an inkling of the 3 letters XRP in it should be treated with extreme caution. You remember that friend in high school that was always just lying about what they did? No matter what you did, they had a story. They could have even done something cool, right? Maybe there was something awesome they did, but they inevitably had to find some way to lie about it. That's Ripple, but minus the doing anything awesome. The last couple of years have been marked by the Ripple team funding the heck out of environmental organizations to flatly attack Bitcoin from the mining perspective, which just turned out to be bunk science and really caused a lot of grief for folks that were producing really high quality research, particularly on the environmental side, folks like Daniel Batten, who are just incredible researchers. Now they're trying to nose their way into federal politics and find a way to get themselves somehow ingratiated with power. That being said, everything XRP does is a lie. Everything they have is stolen. And XRP has no real solid utility outside of, I don't know, being an unregistered security, being something that you can use to lose your money. The thing you have to remember is that when you talk about long-term technology, there is no long-term technology in the space. Bitcoin was the first working decentralized network in this way, peer-to-peer electronic cash. By de facto, it's the oldest. And even then, it's not even 20 years old. It can't drink yet. So to call anything long-term technologically in the space is kind of silly because you have to see if you die or not, basically. You know, it'd be nice to at least make it to middle age before we start talking about who the winners and the losers are. And the winner flat out is Bitcoin because it's the one that survived. It's the only one that didn't have a pre-sale. It's the only one that doesn't have a CEO. It's the only one that has been able to resolve its issues, technological or otherwise, in a decentralized way. And it's the only one that you've tried to kill. Folks have tried to kill over and over again, and they haven't been able to. I mean, even as recent as the last month, XRP had an issue where their blockchain ran out of sync. They had like a validation issue, a technological issue. And they went in and they updated a couple of key nodes, or however the network runs, and they kind of snapped it back into place so that it was functional. Now, here's a problem with that. Why would you put your wealth into something that somebody could, first off, fall out of sync, that could break so easily, and then second off, could be reset by a single individual? What makes Bitcoin different is its network, and that's what makes it so powerful. So it's apples and oranges. You know, it's skyscrapers against anteaters. It's not a comparison. They're totally different things. They're totally different classes of animals. And I think our task in the coming months and years, as folks who like Bitcoin as a technology and either dislike or are agnostic about everything else, is to really help people understand. Okay, Bitcoin is different. Yes, it is a cryptocurrency, but not every cryptocurrency has the same characteristics as Bitcoin, and you should understand that because it makes them materially different things. It makes one a very good place to treat as a long-term savings account to store your wealth, to protect yourself against inflation, and everything else is everything else. It's a security, or it's an unregistered token, or it's a meme, or it's a pump and dump.
Very well said. You brought up some interesting things. One, the friend that's always lying. I had this guy I went to college with. He claimed that he won the national curling championship, like the NCAA curling championship. We were all just like, dude, that's verifiably false. So some people that, the thing about a pathological liar is they don't know that other people see right through their crap. So that's really interesting.
It seems so.
And you made some really great points on the technology conversation. It's like, for me, I got into Bitcoin for a very similar reason. The government sends me the stimmy check. I'm like, where's this money coming from? Obviously, this is just printed out of thin air. So I said, well, let me just gamble it on Robinhood. So I started buying all types of cryptos. Bitcoin was the first one I bought. And then I quickly came to the logical conclusion, okay, Bitcoin was the first, but it's too slow. What's going to be the next Bitcoin? I want more. I was more greedy. I want more upside. Ethereum's faster and better. So at that time I had Ethereum and Litecoin. I didn't even know what these things were, right?
Yeah.
I had no idea Litecoin, for example, was a fork off Bitcoin back in the day. Bitcoin Cash, same thing.
That's right.
But when I heard Guy Swan say that Bitcoin is the only decentralized cryptocurrency, obviously centralization is on a spectrum. So
that's right.
You could argue that Ethereum is somewhat decentralized, although similar to XRP, it's had examples in the past where there was blocks rolled back and the blockchain was, with a centralized group, able to be changed into the past.
That's right.
And if you read the Bitcoin standard, obviously, like a big focus in the Bitcoin standard is how much energy it takes to go back blocks and change things. It's like every block that passes, it's like exponentially harder and takes so much more energy and resources to do that. So point being, when I learned that Bitcoin was the only truly decentralized cryptocurrency, I sold everything and moved to Bitcoin, because for me, that was the obvious like aha moment. And that when he said that, I was like, no way, that's true. Like all these are cryptocurrencies. They're, but Bitcoin is fundamentally different in the most important way.
That's right.
So I echo your sentiment there. Let me ask you a question, because this is a question I get all the time. I got it last night or 2 nights ago. I'm just at like a little friend gathering, get together thing. When someone asks you, is now a good time to buy Bitcoin? And they don't know anything about Bitcoin. Their friend told them, her friend told her to buy it at 16K. She told me, oh, I ignored it. I'm waiting for it to go back to 16K. Then I'm going to buy it. So what's your response to that?
Every day is a great day to buy Bitcoin, right?
I mean, I bought Bitcoin right before this podcast, man.
Yeah, I mean, if you like it, what is your concept of what you're doing with Bitcoin, right? And that's somebody who asks, is now a good time to buy Bitcoin? Why are they asking? Because they're asking like they're trying to get an insider trading tip, right? Like they're trying to get a stock pick. You're going to tell them some way that they can 100x their money. And even that's the wrong question, because really the question that people should be coming to and asking you is, how do I stop from losing my money? But that's a harder question to understand. We want to think, oh, well, I've got $500. What do I do to go and turn it into $2,500? Okay, well, that's kind of the question we're trying to always ask. We want to go and make more money. But the question we're often not asking ourselves, which I think a lot of us have learned in the last couple of years with all the inflation that's taken place, is how do I stop from losing my money? The core functionality of Bitcoin is to be this kind of hardened money. That's what it does. It gives you this known supply. It gives you known issuance. You always know how much is coming out and when. And so what is that you're not getting inflated away. Outside of that, what we're watching is like technological adoption. And so you get the price pumping, and you get the cyclicality, and you get the other sort of stochastic moves and whatnot, and you get the trading, the trading bots, and everybody wants to look at the price on a chart. But you really have to move on from the idea of I'm trying to make something and think, well, I'm trying to save something. And the benefit of being a good saver in Bitcoin is that my money becomes substantially more valuable. Because what you're looking at when you're looking at a Bitcoin chart isn't the price necessarily of Bitcoin going and pumping and getting more valuable. What you're watching is this kind of inevitable thing where everything is devaluing relative to Bitcoin. Now, does that happen in a straight line? No. Is it uncomfortable? Yeah. Are there going to be people who come in and load up and do all kinds of leverage trading and degenerate stuff and crazy whatnot? Yeah, 100%. Happens all the time. You get short squeezes, people get greedy, people over leverage. Is it going to keep happening? Yep, sure as anything, it's going to keep happening. But as long as you buy and you have in your head that your time horizon is 5 to 10 years, then you're going to be fine. And as long as you're asking yourself, well, how do I protect my money? Well, you do it with Bitcoin. It's obvious. You treat it like a savings account. Anything I put into Bitcoin, I'm just constantly, instead of putting my money into a long-term savings account or, a high yield savings account, Bitcoin is my high yield savings account. And it's the money that if there's an emergency, if there's something terrible that were to happen to me or my family, well, you can access it. But it's not there to be used as at least for me right now, my kind of daily checking account. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be or shouldn't be. Of course, we have these technologies, these layer 2s, the ARCs, the Lightning networks, the side chains, the Fedi mints. That's all coming. But just where we're at in history right now is we're saving our butts from losing all of our money from getting inflated away. We even saw it with the recent Doge announcements, with them going around and saying, hey, we're actually looking into who's getting all this money, and they're finding that all these organizations have been paying out your tax dollars to all these things that people didn't even realize that's where the money was going. So the whole thing is broken. The whole system is broken. And so Bitcoin is fundamentally, it's not about whether it's a good time to buy Bitcoin. There's always a good time to be free. And when is a good time to be free? Today's a good time to be free. And once you kind of understand how to ask the right question, well, then that kind of changes the equation, Well, I save, I earn in USD, and I save in Bitcoin. That's what I do. I convert my wealth from something that I have a flow of dollars into something that is a stable resting place in Bitcoin. And I'm happy to sit on it for years and years and years And if I need it in the future, maybe there's a lending tool that I can use. I'll do everything I can to try to avoid it because my assumption is it's going to go up. But it starts with the right question, right? And is it the right time? Yeah, of course the right time. But why are you asking that?
That's really well said. I wrote an article on the topic, and the first paragraph was, well, the real question is, well, actually, I wrote it about, is now a good time to buy crypto? Because that's the question that people ask me. And then the next one is, other than Bitcoin, what coins are you looking at? And I usually say something like, I look at Bitcoin, I look at sats on Lightning.
There you go.
You know, just basically there is only one, right? That's, in my experience, worth holding. That being said, there's not necessarily, like, the market says there's value in crypto, right? There is a market cap of, there's capital being put into other crypto tokens. So who am I to say that the market is wrong? Like, there may be other use cases or situations. I've heard people say crazy things about, you know, maybe it's voting or identity, things like that, where the base chain of Bitcoin is not designed to have all this arbitrary data. So maybe there is a place for a Solana token or something else that's not money, but it's still useful in some other way, like in the you know, smart contracts and things like that. Do you have any sympathy or openness towards crypto in general, or are you strictly everything is built on Bitcoin eventually, and that's the end of the story?
I mean, it's a faceted question, right? There's it's a question of what do you want the technology to do? Should Bitcoin be something that does everything? No. I mean, there's certain transactions I don't pay with cash. There's certain transactions I don't pay with a credit card because it just happens to be a better way to pay. So when you say, okay, like, how do we parse up the space and how do we try to understand it from like a value matrix or how do I think about this, right? I don't think that space is clearly defined currently outside of this big line down the middle, which is Bitcoin, hard money, does a very specific thing, does it very well. It's not designed to be ultra fast. However, it does not mean that it doesn't have that capability. It develops in a way that is decentralized, that's totally organic. There's no CEO of Bitcoin. And outside of organizations that are, you know, funding initiatives, funding developers to work on certain projects and things like this, it's not like Bitcoin can just go out and hire a marketing team. The thing that people really need to understand is that all of the advocacy that's happening for Bitcoin is happening because people understand something about Bitcoin and then it works for them. It simply works for them and they become just kind of rabid advocates of it. When you look at everything else in the space and you look like the kinds of projects that people are making, and you look at the kinds of tools that they have, all of them fail the test when it comes to the function of decentralization, when it comes to the functions of immutability, when it comes to issuance, when it comes to the way in which they're managed. Nobody is asking Ethereum, hey, how are you going to figure out how to be more decentralized? Nobody's asking that. Every time Vitalik gets up and tweets something, Every third comment under there is, oh, Daddy Vitalik, can you please do this thing for me? When are you going to pump my bags? You can't do that with Bitcoin. It doesn't work. You can do that with XRP. You can go to Brad Garlinghouse and say, oh, Brad, please run another marketing campaign for XRP. Please take another meeting with another boss. You can do that with Charles Hoskinson and Cardano and say, oh, Charles, would you please go talk to this university? Please go pump my bags. Please do this. You can't do it with Bitcoin. So do I think they serve a function? Sure. They totally serve a function. People are using them. People are, you know, having fun with them. They have some utility. Is it utility that I personally use in my life? No. Is it a utility that adds value to my life in such a way that I want to put a chunk of my hard-earned time and net worth and value into? No, not really. You know, I'd rather protect my money rather than speculate. If I wanted to speculate, you know, I'd go sit at the track and drink a margarita and watch some horses race. You know, I'd at least get a show out of it. I don't just want to buy an NFT and lose all my cash over the course of the month. But yeah, it's going to take time for people to understand what the distinctions are. But I think it would be overstating to say like, oh, there's something morally wrong or yada, you're a bad person if you try this stuff. And I think it's actually shortchanging I think it's going to shortchange the next 40-50% of the people who actually come in and become very, very deeply understanding of Bitcoin. I think you're going to hurt them if you demonize people who don't really understand the space, if you demonize them for just kind of goofing off and not understanding the things that you do. Not everybody is going to have the level of experience that you have. They're not going to have understood things in the way that you did. And in a lot of ways, it was a lot easier to understand Bitcoin 8 years ago because there were only so many places you could go. There weren't 1,000 people doing podcasts and videos and all sorts of educational stuff and 10,000 different perspectives. You could go to the Bitcoin Talk forums. You could watch Andreas Antonopoulos videos. You could listen to Trace Mayer, and you could listen to Matt Odell. Like that was kind of it, And so these were people who had a really strong technical background that had a gift of breaking this stuff down. But now you're getting, the Bitcoin logo put up on stadiums. Like, it's a different world, man. It's a lot harder now to understand what the heck is going on. And because that's the case, I don't think you should write people off or turn it into like a moral issue to say like, oh, how dare you do this? Like, listen, okay, it's my personal belief that, if you put your money anywhere else trying to protect your money, you're wasting your money. But time will prove that out, time will prove the thesis out. And maybe you do get some value out of having an NFT zombie or a penguin or something. And great, if that's your thing, man. Like, I don't care if you want to go to Sam's Club and I want to go to Costco, like, doesn't bother me, dude. But people use it as an entry point. And so if you don't demonize them, but you say, hey, it does something different, then they have the opportunity to learn.
I just pulled up the Trump coin price.
Oh, goodness, no.
It's ugly, man. I feel very bad for the people who jumped in right around here at the top at $70 or whatever. You can kind of see over time.
What a mess.
It's
but that's how every chart looks. I mean, every chart denominated
in
Bitcoin on a long enough timeline looks like that.
Right. Even I just do the ETH versus BTC price is another one to look at.
That's got to be painful for the .ETH bros.
Yeah, down to 2.2027 on the Bitcoin.
We were gonna flip in. They were coming for us. They were telling us we're gonna take you. The BCH guys were the same way.
Yeah, and then the most recent news just this week or in the last couple days is the Javier Milei coin, where he rug pulled his entire country. Right,
crazy.
Which is pretty crazy because the guy advertised himself as a libertarian, free market, pro-freedom guy, and then he comes in and now everybody's in my view, potentially this could be a big lever to wake people up to the difference between Bitcoin and crypto and why.
Yeah. Ironically, it's also a very libertarian thing to do, though, because it's kind of this caveat emptor, buyer beware, like, oh, sorry, guys, you didn't do your... But I don't know if it violates the non-aggression principle. It depends on if he knew, but you'd have to ask the libertarians if they have more insight into that.
I don't think ignorance is an excuse. I mean, the guy
that's fair, especially on that scale.
He's got to know, right? I mean, if he doesn't, then fine. But in my view, it's theft. Just no different than what they were doing before he came into office, which was just printing the shit out of their peso.
Now, did he make money off of it? Because I remember, I haven't studied it so much. I just saw that he made a post and then they got rugged. Did he walk away with $10 million in this thing?
It's a good question. Which I don't have the answer to at the moment.
Listen, there'll be a CoffeeZilla video about it soon enough.
You emphasize education, and I'm curious of like what specifically you think are the holes. I mean, you talk about how there's a lot of different content creators and education out there, but what are some of the fundamental principles that the next, call it, 50% of Bitcoin users need to understand or should understand in order to make the transition relatively smooth?
Oh, what a big question. I think this has actually been my core focus since joining Bitcoin Park, running research and education there, is figuring out this exact problem. How do you communicate to people something that you yourself have spent thousands of hours studying, thousands of hours working in, participating in, taking things to a level where you can meet folks where they're at. And I don't know that I have a good answer for that, to be honest with you, because I can tell you where I see points of conflict. So there's a big kind of question that I have sitting in my mind, which is it okay to win if you don't win the way you want to win? The thing you have to remember about the cypherpunk movement and the cryptographers that designed and were the initial folks mining Bitcoin as a trinket and transacting with it, or spending 2,000 Bitcoin on a pizza, was these were really ideological folks. And the beauty of what they built is that they built a technology that could live out this cypherpunk ideology that was this freedom money. And so fundamentally, the base layer is safe. I don't really think we're at that existential risk level. We're at kind of the annoyance level where people could do stuff, or there can be risk factors. Risk is not removed, but we were a lot more likely to die 8-10 years ago than we were today. Substantially less likely with around about $2 trillion network. So the question of how do you explain to people who don't hold those values? It's almost like if you build a cool invention, did the person who built the iPhone think of all the ways that people would use the iPhone? Are there atypical ways people using their phones? Did they ever think of recording TikTok videos and turning them into little recording studios? I don't know. Would the people who designed the iPhone, would they be mad seeing people using it in a certain kind of way? Are there wrong ways to use it, right? I don't know, maybe that's the wrong example, right? It's sort of like the wrong tool for the job. So I asked myself this question on the Bitcoin side of things, the best example of it being the ETFs that come out, right? And so the ETFs come out and everybody goes, holy smokes, so ever since the Winklevoss twins in 1617 were getting rejected on an early Bitcoin ETF, it was always a meme. We're going to get the ETFs, and then you would compare it to the gold chart after the ETFs, and it's like 10 years of just growth and growth and growth and growth, and everything is wonderful. And we got an ETF, and the price pumped, and now we have to contend with the very real arc of history that might threaten us, because you can still get a 6102 attack, which is when you come and you say, oh, I'm going to take all of your gold. It's going to be in better custody through the government, and I'm going to issue you a note that will, kind of be a debt note for this, and don't worry, I'll keep it safe. So yeah, we won on that front, but now we just created a bunch of additional risks for ourselves. And so the question is, okay, if you win, if you get disgustingly wealthy being right about something in cypherpunk world, but it becomes popular in normie world and people are using it in the wrong way, are you going to be mad that they're using it in a certain kind of way? So I do think there's kind of this interesting realignment of principles. And fundamentally, I think, is Bitcoin going to lose? Are the principles of Bitcoin at risk, or is it going to get harmed? No, TikTok next block, it's going to keep clicking and doing its thing. But I'm sure that there are going to be continued tools that give people exposure to Bitcoin, but there are risks that create simplicity for people that they may not understand. You might put people at risk. I recently saw there was an announcement, a company called Galoy. They built some technology that integrates with banks, and it allows banks, with some of the new rulings about Bitcoin custody, to be able to basically have back-end banking infrastructure. And hearing that, on one hand, you think, wow, this is immense. The banks are now going to have sort of a tech stack to be able to be Bitcoin native, and they can even hold it, and they can have reserves in Bitcoin, and that's fascinating. And then on the other side, you go, crap, like what are their current reserve ratios, man? Like their entire system is based off of, mismatching receipts and lending, long-term debt receipts, and then you have this inbound cash from people that's sitting in your accounts. It's like, dude, is somebody going to go ahead and like fractional reserve Bitcoin? You're like, oh, they wouldn't be so dumb to do that. And you're like, wait, no, they're obviously going to do that. And so that's a bummer. And you can kind of peer around the curtain and go, well, are we going to be co-opted by the normie world and become, a beacon of corruption and fractional reserve banking and all this terrible stuff? In some sense, I think that's maybe the battle that we have to fight, right? Is that we have to take those values and we have to push them into the normie world, and maybe it involves making stuff not too easy. Because I don't know I don't know, but you see, I'm grappling with it. Like, there's certain stuff in my life where it's like, dude, I will literally pay you more just to make it easy. But okay, do I want to do that with Bitcoin? Well, shit, I don't know. Am I only saying you should make it easy because the money is cheap and I live in a fiat world? Should I really be a little bit more conscientious about certain things? I don't know. It's something that I've got to figure out, and it's something where that's the tension. The tension is, how do you hold true to the values of Bitcoin, and how do you give people some responsibility so that they're able to own all those values while still giving them the opportunity to participate or meeting them where they're at? Because in some sense, if you make it too easy, I think there's a risk that you wind up with this situation of kind of losing what the whole value was in the first place. If I own Bitcoin in my brokerage account, I've lost a huge value proposition to Bitcoin. But do I realistically think that everyone is going to want to hold it themselves? No, I don't, because like my parents wouldn't want to. They would want to own it in an ETF. Now, am I going to do everything I can to get them to custody themselves? You better believe it. But does the average person have, a psychopathic son or daughter that can advocate for them? I don't know. Maybe not. So that's something that we've got to grapple with. It's something that I think is going to be interesting for the community to address in the coming years.
You made some great points there. I preach Bitcoin to so many people, and it's like, am I helping them or potentially setting them up for the 6102 rug pull? Right here, I pulled up the Wikipedia of Executive Order 6102. On the right here is the actual image. But what I found interesting just at first glance of this, Executive Order 6102, the way it's defined here, forbids the hoarding of gold bullion, gold certificates, right? So they phrase it as, gold is being hoarded, and then the rationale is hard times were caused by hoarding of gold, stalling economic growth, worsening the depression. The same thing could be applied to Bitcoin, where it's like, look at all these Bitcoiners, shit's going bad, the economy's in the can, Bitcoiners are hoarding all this Bitcoin. And so if you don't have your keys, not your coins, if you don't have your keys to your Bitcoin, it's very possible. I mean, it's literally already happened once. The human life is not very long, so 1933 is long enough where people our age don't remember this. And many people, I was just telling my roommate about this. He couldn't believe it. I was like, did you know that the government just confiscated all the gold? It's not preventing the hoarding. It's illegal to have it. And now you have to give it to us. And we're going to give you this paper. By the way, the paper's redeemable for gold, but 48 years later, or whatever it is, 1971, obviously Nixon removes us from gold backing the dollar at all. And now you're left with completely worthless fiat paper.
That's
so
right.
These are things that if you've been successful in this world, like the fiat world, you made money, you've got your retirement. My parents are at that retirement age where they tell me things like, we just want consistent cash flow. We just want, stability. We want to protect what we've earned. I say, look, that's exactly why you need Bitcoin. Like you're denominating in a measuring stick that's changing over time. If you want to build a house, how are you going to build a house if every 3 weeks the tape measure gets 10% longer? You're going to be like, that wall is messed up. Like, we can't judge how much value. So just to really hammer home on Bitcoin, 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. Like you said, like we look at the price or in terms of different things. Ultimately, the takeaway for me that I try and communicate to people is Bitcoin is repricing all assets. Doesn't matter what it is. Over time, the true price of everything in terms of Bitcoin will become known. And the price of Bitcoin is infinity divided by 21 million, right? Because there's infinity dollars that are potentially going to be printed. Larry Lepard just came out with a book called The Big Print, which he basically says, look, the mathematics dictates that a big print, more money being issued, is inevitable. And yeah, there's actually, let me jump backwards too. You were talking about how there's all this negative information pushed, rhetoric pushed around Bitcoin and energy and the damage or degradation to the environment. I reached out to an old college professor of mine who's a bigwig economics guy. I hope to get him on the podcast, so I don't want to say anything bad. He's super, super smart. Like, one of the most incredible classes I ever took, it was called Christianity, commerce, and consumerism. And I asked him, hey man, like, I told him your class really set me up to keep asking these questions and learn more about economics and money over time. Do you have any like general take on Bitcoin? And his take was, I'll just read what he said. But he said something like, I don't have an opinion other than the fact that Bitcoin has a place in open-ended globalist consumerist capitalism, global consumer capitalism, and that it's contributing to ongoing worsening environmental degradation. Yeah. I mean,
what did you go to Barnard? What kind of like, where did you, what kind of economics are we talking about here? Are we full Keynesian? Are we, what?
That's the interesting thing is when you control language, you control thought is something that I've been telling people recently. So if you say, okay, inflation is CPI, so inflation is the cost of goods going up, then you can say, well, look at the supply chain got interrupted, or corporate greed. I'm up here in Seattle. I hear this a lot. Corporate greed is
that's
leading.
The issue. Is it a Seattle professor?
No, it's actually out in the Midwest, Notre Dame. But I try and explain to people that no, inflation is the added additional issuance of currency. It's not some basket of goods that changes over time. And when you parse those two things out, the definition, I always, look on Google or look on ChatGPT, and these definitions can actually lead you astray. So understanding that this is the Keynesian, as great point by you, Keynesian. Who cares? Versus like a more Austrian perspective on economics.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like all the fudsters got a good head start, and there's a whole class of boomers that believe everything that they read in the New York Times, and that's kind of it. I forget I think it's called Brandolini's law, which is that the amount of work that you have to do to correct bullshit is an order of magnitude larger than the original bullshit. And this happened in the mining industry very specifically through a very specific person who wrote, a researcher who worked through a central bank. His last name is DeVries. And he wrote a paper where, if you were hearing all these news stories talking about Bitcoin uses an Olympic-sized pool worth of water every transaction, these absolutely garbled, nonsensical statistics that were just pulled directly out of his butthole. He wrote this and he published this, and that became, because the general sentiment was bad towards Bitcoin at the time, that became the cited piece. And so all these people came out and started citing what was absolute drivel, was absolute nonsense, is absolute garbage. And then you have to do an order of magnitude more work to correct the BS. Now, that being said, can you stop people from fudding or spreading BS? No. I mean, education is kind of the only way through, right? You got to learn. And the hardest part about learning is that realizing you might be an idiot. So if you have a big ego, it makes it hard to learn. So that creates a whole suite of issues. But you look at what just happened. Daniel Batten, who is a hardcore environmentalist, investor in the space, recently published a thread where he was lauding a paper that came out of Duke University's Nicholas Institute, where you had independent researchers talking about how you could essentially fully monetize an electrical grid. So get rid of a lot of this slack, a lot of this waste through your generators using rapidly curtailable loads, such as Bitcoin miners. And the problem with that is that the general population doesn't understand energy. They don't understand where energy comes from. They don't understand how energy is converted into electricity. And they don't understand how that electricity, which comes through various generators, has to be first generated, of course, then transmitted and delivered to you. The experience that we have of energy typically, or of electricity, is the electrical bill, right? It's the thing that you get every month in the mail or through your email, charging you with some weird set of numbers that you don't understand. You don't really understand your electrical bill. You probably barely, out of the general population who is not into Bitcoin, it's probably hard to find more than 15% of people who know their price per kilowatt hour that they're paying for electricity, unless they're being kind of flatly shown it. I don't know my price per kilowatt hour for electricity. That being said, when you start to talk about, when you say statements such as, Bitcoin mining is bad for the environment, or Bitcoin mining is bad for the grid, or it does XYZ to the whales, you can almost 10 times out of 10 know that somebody is just repeating a talking point that they have picked up through some publication and they have no idea what the hell they're talking about, if they can't then detail why. If you can't detail why and do it in a coherent way, in a cogent way, you're just parroting headlines. There's a fantastic book that Alex Epstein wrote called Fossil Future, and he's a big Bitcoin advocate, kind of tangentially, but he put a brainworm into people's ears, which was really, really, really valuable. Because the conversation around environmentalism, particularly around energy consumption, was that, okay, well, we all have to work together and we have to put solar on our roofs and switch to LED bulbs and get an electric car. And we have to shut down the coal plants and only use the solar panels. And Alex Epstein comes in and he says, okay, that's all well and good, but you guys don't actually care about the environment. You're anti-human. Because there's a problem that sits below the problem that you're trying to solve. And you're probably virtuous. You probably think you have, the moral high ground on what you're arguing for. You're trying to save the whales. Who wants to kill the whales? That would be kind of rude. Alex Epstein, he comes out and he says, listen, here's the deal. You don't care about poor people, and you're suicidal. And people go, what? I'm brutalized. I'm offended. And he goes, here's the deal. If you look at any study that assesses energy production and consumption, particularly per capita consumption of energy, and you plot per capita consumption of energy on an XY graph, countries by how much they use, right? 10 times out of 10, the higher energy use per capita correlates with higher quality of life. 10 times out of 10. It's not like a 40% correlation. If you found an FDA drug or a drug that you were sending to the FDA that gave you 10 times out of 10 results, you would be a multi-billionaire overnight. It doesn't happen. 30, 40, 50, 60%. Like you're not, when you're talking about statistically correlated things like this, you don't get things that are that tightly correlated. But you get that when it comes to the consumption of energy, per capita consumption of energy, and human flourishing. Typically, per capita GDP is how people are recording it, right? So to say that you think that you can reduce the energy without brutalizing somebody's quality of life, if you can honestly say that, you're not just anti-science in that particular case, but you're anti-human. And to say anything otherwise, to say that people in the developing world should not be generating as much energy as possible, says that you actually don't really care about development happening in developing countries. You don't. You just care about your shtick. You don't care about the data. So where does that bring us with the whole FUD train and the whole conversation about a professor who gets up and says, it's funny because my dad used to do the same thing to me because he works in traditional finance. And I'm not the guy who's gonna rah Bitcoin and just annoy everybody at Thanksgiving, but I'll ask a couple times. Look at it. It has these characteristics. You might want to look into it. And he worked in traditional finance his whole career, and he'd always ask me, "What's the spread? What's the spread?" And in my head, it's like the same thing as we said initially. Like, that's the wrong question, dude. What's the spread? Like, what's the spread? Like, I'm not talking about the market of this thing. I'm talking about a technology that has financial attributes to it. You have to reframe the Overton window, right? You have to give people a new schema, new analogs, new analogies, new metaphors, new ways to really think about this stuff. This is something that Michael Saylor is very good at, and it's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because he makes a lot of these little metaphorical earworms that are very, very memorable. He's been memed 1,001 times, and that's wonderful. It's cool. He is a great advocate. On the other hand, if you want to get trolled by Michael Saylor supporters, respond to something that he said with something that's technically and factually accurate. I ran into this a couple of weeks ago when he talks about Bitcoin as a metaphorical battery that you store your energy in. And me, having worked my Bitcoin career and working my Bitcoin career, particularly in mining, having written a book about mining and having worked for miners from the home scale to the mid-industrial scale up to the mega miners with hundreds of thousands of machines on site, Bitcoin is not a battery. From a physical, flat out, that's not how the laws of conservation of energy work. Now, if you want to say it's metaphorically a battery, yeah, that's beautiful. That's great. I love that. I store my value. I store my time. It's my little time battery. That's great. Is it a physical battery? Nope, it's not. So when you're talking about something specific, you have to kind of understand what domain you're going in. So it's a blessing. It's a blessing and a curse, right? And I understand why he's saying and where it's coming from, and I think it's correct in that case. You know, it's a battery for your value, but the mining itself is not a battery in any sort of physical. But that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down that got me called lots of names on the internet for disagreeing with Michael Saylor.
Well, if you're not getting some pushback, you're probably not doing the right, or your takes are probably just right down the line.
Yeah,
I think
and it means
getting pushback's a good sign.
There's new people coming, right? New people, and everyone's got to learn.
100%. I actually went back and listened to the What is Money first 9 episodes, or maybe I got halfway through it. Profound stuff. I mean, Michael Saylor is one of the best, if not the best, communicators. I mean, obviously he has a more fiat or traditional finance perspective on things, but his articulation of how energy has been the thing that allows humans to level up in advancement, right? You could even point to look at what happened in the gold standard years in the 1800s. It led to the Industrial Revolution, which allowed for mass production of goods, which increased the quality of life so much. There's this concept of the Kardashev scale. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, civilizational use of energy.
Right, like if we want to be this species that continues to grow and flourish, we need to harness more energy and produce more energy. It's a very good point that you made, where if you're advocating for reduction of energy production, you are advocating for the reduction of the quality of human life. So anti-human is a great way to describe that. I think in my perspective, yeah, we need more energy. By the way, my dollars per kilowatt hours, 11 cents for the first 70 kilowatt hours per month, and then they bump it to 13 cents. So up here in Washington, we have a lot of hydropower.
A lot of hydro out there.
Yeah, which is generally, it's not coal, so it's not burning, stuff into the air. And I'm not super deep down that rabbit hole of is coal even that bad for the environment. I tend to, when it comes to the CO2 conversation, I tend to say, okay, if you advocate and say that CO2 is the thing that's damaging the environment, then why are we geoengineering the planet and spraying heavy metals in the sky? And maybe that's having an impact.
There's an easy way to sniff out people with that opinion is you just have to ask them if they have any critique of China or India, because, well, that's the first question. Do you have critique of China or India? Because the country that has greenlit more coal plants in the last 5 years than every other country combined is China.
Right.
So that's the first thing you have to ask. The second thing you have to ask is, would you be willing to do something to stop China from developing monetarily as a country? They're reaching this sort of like growing middle class era in their place as a sovereign nation. Would you go and will you go protest the Chinese? Will you go stop them? Will you tell them to stop developing as a society? Are you going to do something about it?
Or are you going to buy the iPhone and just live your life?
I don't know. It seems like advocacy back in the day, man. I could chain myself to a redwood and go hang out for a couple of months. Like, that's not so bad. I don't need to shave that much, and might enjoy the sunrises, bring a raincoat. All right, if you really, really, really think that this is existential, if you really think that we are all dead and the climate crisis is coming in 5 years, you should not be throwing paint on Rembrandts. You should be attacking Chinese coal plants.
It's very well said. Like, talk is cheap, right?
That's what you should be doing.
And I respect people.
You only argue in the first world. It's going to daddy instead of going to the problem.
100%, 100%. I don't have an issue. Like, I met a guy in October. I was climbing at the gym, and I was just chatting with him, and it was right before the election. He started telling me about how he's taking a month-long leave of absence to go to Michigan to campaign for the Kamala presidency. Sure. And I said to him, and I honestly mean it, I said, I respect the fact that you're actually acting on your beliefs. That's noble in some way. I may not see, what you're trying to do as useful or a good use of your time, but I respect that. So I think that's kind of the Bitcoiner mentality, is like,
I think that's great. Yeah.
Let the market do it.
Just don't LARP about it.
100%. So I want to get into Bitcoin mining specifically, and I find it interesting that it's such a, like, people just get bored by Bitcoin mining, or people will say it's a really hard business, or it's just kind of a lame topic, which is so interesting because it is the foundation of what makes Bitcoin, the network, secure, right? So can you just, from 100,000 foot view, like, how does Bitcoin mining secure the network? And then I've got another question, a couple of other questions specifically on Bitcoin improvement proposals and centralization.
Oh, man. I don't know who you're talking to telling you that mining is boring.
I don't know. I hang out with all these YouTubers, and they're all number go up guys, and they're like, every time we do a Bitcoin mining
at charts. Listen, man, if you want to stand on 1,000 megawatt, on a gigawatt site, a site that's consuming an amount of energy that 100 years ago, 150 years ago would be the net energy consumption of countries, of continents, and it can happen on a single 300-acre site. It's unbelievable what's happening. It's unbelievable for the simple reason that Bitcoin mining is what brings the entire network to life. It's what makes it live. It is fundamentally, and it's because we're proof of work, right? If you do proof of stake, if you do some other nonsense consensus mechanism, some weird algorithm that runs on a GPU, we don't do that. We do proof of work, which is done through an ASIC, which is a chip that is on a mining machine that is hashing the SHA-256D algorithm, and it's doing that trillions and trillions of times per second. And fundamentally, that brings life to a computer system. It's unfreaking believable. What you have to really understand to be wowed, to really be fascinated by Bitcoin, is you have to understand that every trend in the tech space in the last 40, 50 years is towards greater efficiency and towards greater improvements and towards these like phase changes. Even just recently we had this change in the algorithms with DeepSeek. You have DeepSeek come out, and all of a sudden you're using way less energy, and you're way more powerful. You don't need all that compute, and you could run this insane algorithm that does your AI. And that's kind of the trend that we're used to. And something fundamentally different is happening in Bitcoin mining, because every day that goes by, megawatts upon megawatts upon megawatts of additional energy are going and being consumed. So it's fundamentally something different. The machines are getting more efficient. They're doing more work for every joule that you put into them. But at the base level, what are we doing? We're going out and we're reaching our tentacles into every corner of the earth, literally every corner of the earth. And we are finding energy that is not priced, that is not consumed, and it has no value. Or we're finding energy that's a risk. There's too much. It's in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we're monetizing it. And we're using the monetization of something that's a waste product in another part of the world, oil and gas industry, in the electrical generation industry. And we're using it to power this insane machine that protects and issues money. We're fundamentally linking the entropy of our world to the protection of our value. It's kind of unheard of.
It's wild. The energy.
So I don't know who's telling you it's boring. Fundamentally the coolest thing.
I guess it's not boring, but it doesn't. If you have a Bitcoin mining podcast a show on Bitcoin mining, it's going to get less clicks than the one that has the chart in the background and it says
number go up.
2028 Bitcoin is worth 1 point. The next question I want to ask is around fees and the evolution of Bitcoin in general. So the block subsidy, the amount of Bitcoin that is created or issued or comes into circulation every single block, it's 450 per day. What is that, 3.125 per block right now? How do you see when someone says, hey, Bitcoin long term is not sustainable because that subsidy goes to zero over time? And you're obviously in the Bitcoin mining industry, so you're seeing these people making massive capital investments, businesses. How do you think about? Do you think that fees eventually become extremely high, and what are the implications of that?
Yeah. Well, first, okay. So the first thing to address is, again, like we mentioned this, like you have to be asking the right question, right?
Which I tend not to do, apparently.
Well, no. But you ask a great question, which is like the question that everybody gives, which is like, are fees going to be enough to sustain miners?
Right.
Well, I don't know, bro. Do I look like I have a wizard hat on? You know what I mean? Like the FUD of the day was like, I remember reading something where they said that like when they were building trains back in the day that were supposed to go faster and faster, people didn't want to ride on the trains because they were scared that if a train moved too fast, you wouldn't be able to breathe. Because the oxygen would be passing by too quickly, right? Like,
I've never heard that one. That's
that
hilarious.
kind of, it's like one of these 1800s like apocryphal stories, right?
Yeah.
Like the things you didn't know back in the day. It's like, it's the same thing as you look at the stuff that people were doing during like the Black Plague, like wearing the big noses with the potpourri stuffed into them, and you're sort of like, yeah, man, I guess you could do that, but there were people out there. I don't know. I don't think they had germ theory back then, but there must have been somebody out there that was like a mad scientist saying like, no, it's the germs, just wash your hands. But you know, how do you explain to somebody what the future looks like if they can't even conceive of the technology that they're looking at? You know, it's like you're looking at the internet, and people used to talk about each other and say like, talk about the internet. There's the famous quote about like, oh, internet's just going to be like the passing fad, kind of like a fax machine or something like this. Like that's the thing you have to be most cautious for, is because like you're more likely than not going to say something dumb if you try to predict the future of this thing. At the end of the day, when you look into the actual function of the network and you look at the way that it's incentivized, right? And you can kind of quote the Charlie Mungers of the world when you look and you say, if you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. When you look at the incentives of Bitcoin mining and you say, okay, well, what do we know? We know that a Bitcoin miner is rewarded from the network in two ways. They're rewarded by the subsidy, and we know that that gets cut in half every 4 years. And we know that they get rewarded by fees. Okay, they get paid by fees because to send your Bitcoin transaction, you have to pay a fee. It's like, okay, well, that's how I make money. Well, that's true, but that's incomplete information, because it is the way they make money, but it's not the only way that you make money mining Bitcoin. The business of Bitcoin mining is related to, necessarily, but not incentivized in the exact same way as Bitcoin, the network itself, right? So why do I mine? I mine because I want to make money, and my hashes have value, and I'm paid for those hashes, and I'm rewarded in Bitcoin. Okay, well, that's fundamental. However, if you look in practice what people do, what they do is they find some way to add value, to add utility, to add services through their Bitcoin mining that give them the opportunity to have some kind of crazy asymmetry, some kind of business model that blows every other business model out of the water, right? And so here, let's go into a couple examples. First example, that the study I was mentioning that came out of Duke that was talking about curtailable loads. So mega miners on ERCOT in Texas, which is the grid. In a grid, it basically consists of generators, so generating assets that are making electricity. You have transmission, you have delivery to final customers, and you have a grid operator that's trying to kind of conduct this symphony, right? And so over the course of a day, the way people use electricity changes, and you can graph it over time, and it's called the duck curve because it kind of looks like a duck. And so what the grid operator has to do is they have to match the suppliers of energy, so your combined cycle plants, your nuclear assets, your hydro assets, your coal plants, your solar plants, your wind farms. You have to take all these different players, and you have to coordinate them with the consumer, with people using their electricity. And if you mismatch, you get brownouts, you get blackouts, you start blowing stuff up on the grid. So it's very important that you do it properly. So the grid operator has this tall task. And the way the game used to be played was that our priority as a grid operator is to always provide stable power at accessible prices, because you can't be charging $10 a kilowatt hour for somebody to just run their AC. It's not gonna work for people, right? So what you do is you have a market and you say, okay, you can bid in people who produce energy at certain slices of time through the course of the day. I can predict, but I can't know exactly how much demand there's going to be. And then when we get to that time of the day, we're going to monitor how much demand there actually is, and we're always going to have to match exactly what the production is. And a grid doesn't store energy. If my grid is consuming 20 gigawatts of electricity, it means that my producers are generating 20 gigawatts of electricity. So this is a hard thing to do, and you run into really big problems when you do it at scale. One of which is that when I need people to drop load, I can't just call up Gladys in the middle of Abilene and say, hey, could you turn your air conditioning off because we have too many people using their electricity today? You can't do that. And as we discussed, it's anti-human. You can't tell people to do less. You can't have them kind of curtail their quality of life. But you can do something really powerful with Bitcoin mining, which is that a Bitcoin miner who is sitting there and has tens or hundreds of megawatts of power that they are consuming, they now get to act like the inverse of a power plant. Almost what's called a peaker plant, right? It's for peak demands. When you have these spikes in demand from the consumer, it's actually more cost efficient for the grid operator to go to the Bitcoin miner and say, listen, could I kind of give you some money back? Like, you cut a deal with me and then you just turn off. Because if I go to this peaker plant, I know I'm going to have to pay more to get them to produce electricity for the grid. It's actually way more stable for me, and you can shut down way quicker, right, and you can turn on, which means when I don't have a lot of people consuming electricity, but I still want to keep my generators happy because they need to make money because my generators can't be going broke, you're still there. You'll still buy the electricity. So I can actually now do a business deal where I'm sitting as this kind of capacitor between the supply and the demand of electricity, and I'm soaking up everything that's slack in the system. That's just one example, and it only gets more bizarre when you start to look into the utility of Bitcoin mining. And so what I mean by that is you can use the product of Bitcoin mining is heat. We produce a lot of heat. And it's thermodynamics. The electricity that you put in cannot be created or destroyed, so it has to go somewhere, and it goes somewhere in the form of heat. That heat is not waste. It doesn't have to be waste. It can be a product. And so there's a whole slew of products that are coming out. Canon released a baseboard heater that you would plug into your wall socket and have in the side of your room. It's a 40 terahash miner that heats your room. It's an air heater. I've did some early writing on using S9s for home heating, porting them into your HVAC system. There's the crypto cloaks, these heating boxes. There's hash boxes. There's folks that are doing water heating. There's Coin Heated, who's heating his pool. A number of other folks that have heated hot tubs and other water heating elements with Bitcoin miners. There are people that heat their circulatory loops that they have through their floors or through their driveways. They heat those with miners, with Bitcoin miners. Normally it would just be a heating element and it would be a sunk cost and I would lose money and just pay my bill. But there are people that do this and they heat their water systems and they melt the snow on their driveway over the course of the winter by using Bitcoin miners. So when you compare that to the original way that you get paid and you ask a question like, are fees going to be enough to overtake the subsidy? I don't know, bro. But I know that there are people who will always be mining on ERCOT because they have a financial incentive to serve as a capacitor on the market. I know that there will be people that will always be wanting to use their home water heating system as a Bitcoin miner. I know that there are always going to be in the middle of West Texas or in Nebraska or South Dakota, there's always going to be oil and gas sites that are not allowed to vent or flare their natural gas. And so there's an incentive to bring a Bitcoin mine out there, attach it to a genset, and to consume all that waste. There's always going to be an incentive for every piece of hydropower generating equipment on the face of the earth that could be running at 80%, but it's currently running at 40%. There's always an incentive for them to throw a Bitcoin miner next to them, even if they run it themselves, crank up their turbines to 80%, and then monetize the entire asset that they're running. Those are business problems. And those business problems, we haven't even really started to tackle those at scale. There are definitely big operators and some folks that are doing some wonderful stuff in the space. But in my mind, it will, when it becomes ubiquitous, when you buy a house and when the seller is handing you the keys, and then they are giving you the access to the Bitcoin miner that heats the water heater, like that's when we'll know that we become ubiquitous, right? That's when we'll know that that we've really kind of embedded ourselves into the functional community. We're almost becoming that, moving up on the Kardashev scale, so to speak, right? But that being said, it seems like it has nothing to do with like the fees or the Coinbase rewards, but in reality, it has everything to do with that, because this is how people are going to use Bitcoin mining, and in some cases, they're not even going to be thinking about that stuff.
100%. And I know I've taken your overtime here, so I'm going to let you go. The two things I just want to add really quick. One, Bitcoin, in my mind, newbie mind, helps fortify the grids, right? It makes them more resilient. It makes them more capable. It solves, as you just outlined, a very common problem that businesses face. And I know we were going to chat a little bit about bikes and Bitcoin. We'll save that for next time, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin is just money, and life, as you've got going on in the background, you've got a lot, a little toddler to deal with.
Yeah, I've got to wind it down, unfortunately.
Yeah, man. Though that's the stuff that really matters. So, Rob, thank you so much for making time for this. I learned a ton, wrote down some notes to follow up, and I will look forward to seeing more content and checking out your book, The Bitcoin Mining Almanac.
I'll send you a copy. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Awesome, Rob. Have a great day, man. Thank you.